All right, let's wrap it up with the Washington Commanders. Whole new world. Adam Peters as GM. Dan Quinn takes over as head coach. Commanders coming off a 4-13 season. Had the number 2 overall pick. Use it on Jayden Daniels. And look, they had one of... Wow. Yeah. Jordan Davis. As I continued talking, I was like, I don't think that's his name. Use it on Jayden Daniels, who is the Heisman Trophy winner from LSU. I know exactly who Jayden Daniels is. Don't worry, we'll just cut that out. Jayden Daniels from LSU, and I don't know what to expect from the Commanders, which I think makes them fun this year. You know, a lot of veteran players, right? Like when you're rebuilding, you're not always bringing in as many veterans as Washington has brought in, and I think that gives them the opportunity. If Daniels hits the ground running, looking like a pretty polished passer. Coming out of LSU with great running ability. I mean, Washington has a chance to do some damage this year.
Yeah, I mean, is this the most completely transformed franchise kind of from top to bottom in the NFL this offseason in terms of just the sheer amount that they've changed?
I think it is.
Coach, GM, player turnover. I mean, rosters turnover, 25% year on year in the NFL across the board. But like Washington have changed so much, starting quarterback, obviously, and that creates just this giant layer of unknown. I mean, we can project what we think is going to happen based off the players that they brought in, but we also know when you change that much, there's just no way of knowing how that's going to work. And so I think it gives them a really wide range of outcomes from this could all come together really quickly. If Jayden Daniels turns out to be the guy and last year's one-season wonder was actually just who he's going to be going forward, I mean, then they've answered their quarterback situation. They've got a really good receiving core already. Okay, the offensive line is a work in progress, but you pair that with a Dan Quinn defense that over the last few years has been phenomenal. If he's able to work his magic on the defensive side of the ball, resuscitate, Jonathan Allen, who had a relative down year a season ago, and suddenly get some play out of that secondary. And, Washington could be a surprise playoff team and make some noise. Alternatively, the whole change could just be too much, and it's discordant and it takes a while to work. And basically this is almost a write-off year but before next season where it all starts to gel and comes together.
So starting on the offensive side of the ball, we know Jayden Daniels and his strength throwing the ball down the field, plus adding what he can as a scrambler and in the design run game. But his ability to get the ball down the field, I'm intrigued by Terry McLaurin, man. I mean, we used to joke about when Allen Robinson was in his prime and he never really had a very good quarterback to play with, going back to college, going back to high school. Terry McLaurin, this could be his best opportunity. Now, I thought Taylor Heineke, even though Taylor Heineke's not great, a lot of times, his chuck and duck style gave McLaurin a lot of opportunities, but Jayden Daniels really gives Terry McLaurin some opportunities. McLaurin's been one of those wide receiver ones who can still produce even with uneven quarterback play. So he's been QB proof, but I think he has a chance to take the next step. We've seen Jahan Dotson settle in probably as a slot receiver in Kliff Kingsbury's offense here. I think Dotson has a chance to have a big season. De'Ami Brown has that downfield ability that we saw in preseason week 1, where he was just a go ball specialist at UNC, and if that's all he's doing here as a downfield threat, that could be a great fit for Jayden Daniels. I'm intrigued by this group of playmakers.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, a little bit concerned by what the offensive line is going to be, but when you just look at literally like the 7-on-7 team that they can put out there, right? Like you just look at the skill position players and the quarterback that Washington's able to deploy, looks really exciting. So I think that group could be really good and could make some real noise right away. It's just a kind of question of, does the offensive line undermine the whole thing?
So what does that line look like? Tyler Biadasz comes in to play center. I think Sam Cosmi's probably the best player there, playing right guard. Andrew Wiley is a reasonable right tackle. I mean, they're in creep back toward average range, but I think they're on the bottom end of it. The left tackle I think is a concern. Cornelius Lucas has been a journeyman over 10 years in the NFL, really as a swing tackle, and I love a good swing tackle, Sam. A guy that can play left and right tackle and play it at Cornelius Lucas's level. He's not the great Morgan Moses, but he's good. No. I love Cornelius Lucas, but I usually don't want him penciled in as my starting left tackle. And if it's not him, it's third-round pick Brandon Coleman out of TCU, who had some struggles last year. So, yeah, there are some concerns with the line up front. I'll just highlight this too, though. Kliff Kingsbury's offenses have often maybe overachieved as far as the run game goes. Gotten more out of what the line can bring and what the running back can bring. And again, when you add the running component of Jayden Daniels too, I think from a run game perspective, that might be okay. I'm a little worried from a pass protection standpoint, though, for Daniels as a rookie.
And actually, bringing up Kingsbury's is a good point as well. I'm kind of fascinated to see if his offense, if his scheme is showing signs of any evolution from what he finished in Arizona, because Kingsbury, I think generally speaking, as an offensive coach, if you are able to consistently demonstrate evolution and innovation schematically and keep coming up with new things year on year on year, that's how you stay at the cutting edge. And that's why Kyle Shanahan remains one of the best offensive minds in the NFL. It's why Andy Reid remains one of the best coaches in the NFL. And Mike McDaniel is sort of showing this as well. These guys, every year, they're coming out with something new, something different. They're managing to stay ahead of the curve, and that's what makes them great. Kingsbury came in with this like legitimate old school air raid offense and was like, we're going to run that at the NFL level. Nobody's done it for years. It can work. And it didn't work. And it lasted like that plan lasted weeks, not months, right? It was immediately abandoned. We're going to dump the 10 personnel stuff. 4 wide receivers isn't going to work. We're going to have to go to more traditional 11 personnel. And that first year, he showed an incredible learning curve, really, to sort of dump the things in the offense that weren't going to function, figure out what the NFL version of his offense was going to have to look like, and kind of roll from then. But then somewhere along the way, it stopped evolving. And he was like, no, we're going to keep receivers lined up in the same place. We're not going to use all this pre-snap motion. All the things that most offenses in the NFL are trending towards. Kingsbury doesn't want that because he values sort of tempo and, guys lining up in the right place at the right time and just executing fast. I just don't know that is going to fly at the NFL level, or that it's a net win relative to the low-hanging fruit that you could be exploiting in terms of that motion and all that kind of thing. So are we going to see evidence that he's been out of the game for a little bit, he's had a chance to look at the offense, figure out where it can get better, and has changed it? Or is he hoping that simply changing the personnel is going to get him back to where he was when it was doing well?
Yeah, I'm interested to see what happens schematically. The other high-level thing that I think Kingsbury did, the year that the Cardinals made that run, into the playoffs and then lost to the Rams on the 2021, started to tap into Kyler Murray as a runner a little bit more. He wasn't doing that in the first year for Kyler. Again, Jayden Daniels, I've said this more in recent years than ever because you're getting more quarterbacks who are capable of doing this, but Jayden Daniels could probably rush for 800 to 1,000 yards in the NFL level if you chose to do that, the same way I think Anthony Richardson could, the same way Lamar Jackson has and Justin Fields has. I mean, Jayden Daniels could be one of those guys if you chose to do that. And if you choose to use his legs as that much of a weapon, we've seen Kingsbury do that in the past with Kyler Murray. He didn't always want to do it, but, he made that adjustment, and it just opens things up. And it protects the offensive line when you're leaning into the quarterback's running ability. When we talk about, if I'm describing the best case scenario here, Jayden Daniels being worthwhile as the number 2 pick and as advertised, these pieces of the offense coming good, as we're saying, but the way they've built this defense, if they can come together under Dan Quinn, right? I mean, it is a mix of, I think they drafted some really good long-term players, the Mike Sanderstills of the world in the slot, right? Johnny Newton up front. But you also have one-year deals of Bobby Wagner just coming in on a one-year deal in a rebuilding team. And Jeremy Chin taking a one-year flyer and a guy who showed some versatility with Carolina throughout his career. And then the other piece is because they've gotten rid of Chase Young and Montez Sweat over the last couple of years, it's a completely different defensive line, right? It used to be the strength was this front four. Now they've left Jonathan Allen and Deron Payne there, and edge rusher is probably one of the biggest question marks on the team.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's very different from what it used to be, and that edge rusher position in particular is still a real question mark and a potential area of weakness. But I love their draft because they took a bunch of players. They took a lot of guys that you think could make impacts right away. Obviously, Jayden Daniels, a quarterback, but Johnny Newton from Illinois, the defensive tackle, even though they had a couple of defensive tackles already in Deron Payne and Jonathan Allen. Like, there's enough rotation involved in that position that you can get Newton on there for 500 snaps and not take anything away from those two guys. In fact, potentially enhance those two guys because they can play a little bit less and they can rotate out and get Newton on the field. Sainristil, who you said, Ben Sinnott, the offensive tight end, Coleman, who might end up having to start at left tackle, even guys like Luke McCaffrey, lower down the draft. They've got a really intriguing group of rookies on top of all the free agent additions that they made.
You had mentioned Jonathan Allen. He's coming off of his worst season, 59.7 PFF grade, 37 grade in the run game. Moved off the point of attack quite a bit. Really struggled down the stretch. I think, as I have talked to people about this, it looked like, was it because he lost his friends? Was it because he was disinterested? Was it because they were just out of contention? At his best, though, Jonathan Allen, an absolute disruptor up front. And when we talked about the Cowboys and their ability to force turnovers, does Dan Quinn really have that magic? I mean, we're talking about the Cowboys being first in takeaways in 2021 and 22, in the top 5 or 6 last year. Can Dan Quinn bring that magic, or did it just coincide with, well, when you have Micah Parsons rushing the passer, you're going to create havoc. When you have Trevon Diggs and Deron Bland, like, they happen to find some really good ball hawk type of players in their secondary. I don't know if you have that personnel here in Washington to be able to do that, but I'm interested to see what Dan Quinn and his effect is on this defense that certainly is not as talented on paper as what he had in Dallas.
Yeah, and I'm curious, can he adapt the defense to suit the personnel here? That was, I think, what he did a really good job of in Dallas, was he put players in a good situation to succeed. So can he do that to the unique players or unique personnel that Washington has? Can he get the best out of Jonathan Allen? Can we see, is Frankie Louvu going to become a really key player for him? Those kinds of things. So I'm really interested in seeing what Dan Quinn's Washington defense looks like, having seen his Dallas work.
Louvu, not saying he is Micah Parsons, but there are very few players in the NFL that are linebackers who can dabble as pass rushers, and Frankie Louvu is one of the few people who can do that. Of course, Micah Parsons could do that, but they moved him full-time to just rush the passer because he's elite.
Yeah.
Louvu is one of the few versatile type of linebackers who could be a true edge rusher if you asked him to.
No, absolutely. Parsons is different because he couldn't just dabble it either. He could be, I think he could be a top-tier linebacker, and he is a top-tier pass rusher. Frankie Louvu is a guy that, is a good linebacker who can absolutely moonlight as a legitimate pass rusher.
All right, man. Before we wrap it up with Washington, the one other thing I wanted to highlight, Emanuel Forbes. Keep an eye on him. So it's a new regime. Are they still tied to him? He's a former first-round pick, but just really struggled last year as a rookie, being in the 160-pound range. Did him in, especially against A.J. Brown. Some rough reps there. Interested to see if they can get anything out of him, because I think he's got the type of ball skills that fit with Dan Quinn. But look, the early reports on, getting whooped by Garrett Wilson at their joint practices, not great so far for Emanuel Forbes.
Well, he's a perfect example of, here's a problem for Dan Quinn to solve, right? You've got this 160-something pound cornerback, long guy who is a ball hawk, who is actually kind of feisty at the catch point, but really struggled when he was just put one-on-one with a guy like A.J. Brown last year. What do you want to do with this guy? How do you get the best version of him, or even simply make him NFL viable? Because he isn't at 160-something pounds playing the way he was last year. So that, I think, is a great example of, what does Dan Quinn do to sort of resuscitate the career of Emanuel Forbes? Because, I think he has talent and he's got playmaking ability, but he can't play the way that he was playing last year in that scheme. They need a different answer or a different plan for him, and that becomes one of Dan Quinn's first sort of problems to solve as a schematic coach working the Rubik's Cube.
All right, I just want to sum up what I think the best and worst case scenario here would be. I mean, Jayden Daniels fitting with McLaurin and Jahan Dotson, getting the ball down the field, O-line being average plus, right? I think that's in their range of outcomes. Dan Quinn working his magic on the defensive side of the board. side of the ball and like sneaking into the playoffs maybe, or at least battling in the playoff picture. The division's tough. They shouldn't be better than Dallas or Philadelphia, but if they show they can compete with them and then, hey, get ready to really compete in 2025, worst case, I think you mentioned it earlier, though, all the new additions just don't work, right? It's this group of, maybe some intriguing youth, but the veterans, it just doesn't mix. It just doesn't show up on the field here in year one, and, get after it in 2025 and try to get better.
Yeah, exactly. Like, best case scenario is Jayden Daniels is legit, and that makes them a genuine wild card type of team or wild card contender. Worst case scenario is it's just not working properly, and we're crossing fingers that like various pieces of this puzzle are long-term solutions, even if they're not 2024 solutions.